About this time of year every year, I get a lot of phone calls and field a lot of questions around the idea of should I pull my child out of school and send him or her to Wilderness, or should I wait till the end of the term, the school year? And while I say often, I don't give advice about what you should do or shouldn't do, but I will talk about the thinking. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the thinking that goes into that question. I think the first thing is it's about priorities. I think it sends a clear message when you pull a child out of school about your priorities, about the mental health and well-being taking the first and foremost priority in your mind. And I think that's a helpful message for the child to hear. Sometimes in the summertime, children kind of experience it as a lower priority. They think of it almost like it's summer camp with some therapy. And so sometimes it's a more challenging program for us, for the child, because they don't really take it as seriously. They take it for granted. We move around that, of course, but it can be a challenge. And I think that's because it's kind of the attitude and the culture around it in the family. Another thing that the family might worry about is the stigma. You pull a child out of school in the middle of the school year, and it's harder for that to be discreet in terms of your community or your neighbors. And while social stigma for mental health and addiction issues is real, that those judgments are there, I think if we support them, if we underline them by buying into them, by being held captive or hostage by them, I think we reinforce that message. And so for me, what I talk to parents about is the idea that there's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about when it comes to mental health and addiction issues. Watching this for the last 20 years, what I've come to realize is that everybody has somebody that they love or care about who struggles with mental health or addiction issues. In fact, many families will report after they engage in this process and start to share beyond their immediate circle, what they come to find is that many people have shared the same struggles. And in some instances, many have also tried the same kind of interventions with their child or their family member. So it can be a powerful way of building community for many people. Some people are worried about the disruption in school. And this, for me, is a very personal and profound aspect of this question. I think when children get their head right, when they get well, when they get clean and sober, everything else will fall into place. I love the story in the movie Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams' character is talking to one of his colleagues, and they're talking about this priority of academic or professional success over mental health and well-being. And the example that Williams' character uses to illustrate is the infamous Unabomber. And he describes him by all of his academic accomplishments in his resume. And he ends with describing that he just talked about the Unabomber. And so when we get out of balance, when we get out of perspective, we can all think about examples in our life where people have been successful professionally or academically, but haven't been healthy in their relationships or with themselves or with substances. And yet, conversely, we can see people, when they get well, all of their resources, intellectual resources, all of their capacities, all of their gifts come to the front. And they're able to manifest them in their lives. And so I think for families, it's important to say those things are wonderful. Those gifts and talents are wonderful. And what's most important is your relationship that you have with yourself, with your symptoms, with your problems, and also with other people in your life. That's the most important thing for us. Academics can be made up later. And I often share my own personal example, my own personal story about dropping out of high school in 10th grade, being sent to treatment, getting things right for myself later on, going back to high school, finishing up, making up, starting college later than everybody else, and then getting straight A's in 3 years, and then eventually a PhD. And even today, I draw on the experience of treatment, of therapy during adolescence and early young adulthood. I draw on that as much in my personal and professional life as I do any of my formal education. It's important, I think, for families to let go of this idea of a standard or normal time frame. I know we're very attached to them. We worry about being outside of the box, right? Getting off track. But I think a lot of times what our children are telling us is it's not working for them. It's not fitting for them. And so trying an alternate track, an alternate way of going through young life can be very, very important and reinforcing. We don't want to be fitting square pegs into round holes. We want to find out what works best for the child. And in many cases, for the children whose parents are considering this, it's not working for them. The last thing I'll say about wilderness therapy is that it's not a last resort. I think many people, because they don't understand what goes on, they haven't felt it, they haven't been there, they imagine it to be a very invasive intervention. And while it is a significant intervention, most of our participants by the end of their stay, say to us, say to each other, every person in high school should have to have this experience. So when you're considering placement of your child, think about the priorities, think about the message it sends, think about whether or not you're buying into or supporting the stigma, and then recognize that this is an intervention that many of your children will draw on for the rest of their lives. It'll be something that'll be perhaps one of the happiest phases of their lives, and for many of them a turnaround, and for a lot of them a very rich process. I'll conclude with this idea that when I went into college, I wrote about my treatment experience, and I've received dozens, if not hundreds, of essays from former students where they talk about their treatment experience in their college essay. And I'll tell you, because of my not so great academic resume in high school, I was worried that I might not get in. And a powerful thing happened. The person who accepted me made a special phone call, and she told me, we didn't let you in spite of your essay and your story and your struggles. We let you in part due to them and the lessons that you learned from them. The children who go through this process, in my opinion and perspective, often have more wisdom, more depth, greater resources to deal with life than children who never get into trouble. So if we shift our thinking about wilderness, if we shift our thinking about what it means to go into a wilderness program, I think the question answers itself. It's one that you have to answer yourself, that I can't answer for you, but what I can do is talk about the thinking that goes into it, challenge some of the assumptions that you might have. So I hope this was helpful for you, and good luck in your decision making. Thank you.